The next question, number 12, doesn't have a line reference, right? No lines 10 to 12 or lines 15 or anything like that. So we might be inclined to skip this and leave it until the end, and that wouldn't be necessarily wrong. Whenever you see a question without a line reference, it's usually going to be the case that you're going to skip it because either you're not going to have a good idea of where the answer might be at the time, or it's a general question and you would definitely want to leave that to the end, as we've discussed previously. But in this question, we can actually do it right now. We can do it right after doing number 11 because we can make use of a concept or a strategy called keywords. A keyword is a word or words, or in this case numbers, in a question that are conspicuous, that stand out in the question, such that if we find those same words in the passage, we probably have found the place in the passage where we can find the answer to the question. So in this one, what do you think the keywords might be? Well, 1960s and 1970s are probably going to be a good thing to look for in the passage, because if we find these dates, and if there's only one portion of the passage that talks about these dates, it could be a good chance that that's the answer to the question. Another set of keywords would be Soviet Union. If we can find the words Soviet Union in the passage, it's a good chance we'll find the answer there as well. So where, when we skim back, do we find Soviet Union? Do we find 1960s and 70s? Right at the beginning, right? Soviet Union's in the 1960s and 70s. So at the very least, this would be a good place to start looking for the answer to this question. Notice, just building on the previous question, this is another function question. Again, we see the phrase serves to, and each of the choices begins with a verb, right? Introduce something, demonstrate, list, or emphasize. So what we want to know is why does the passage talk about the discussion of life in the Soviet Union? So let's go ahead and read this. Visitors to the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s always marveled at the gap between what they saw in state stores, shelves empty or filled with things no one wanted, and what they saw in people's homes, nice furnishings and tables filled with food. What filled the gap? A vast informal economy driven by human relationships, dense networks of social connections through which people traded resources and created value. The Soviet people didn't plot how they would build these networks. No one was teaching them how to maximize their connections the way social marketers eagerly teach us today. Their networks evolved naturally, out of necessity. That was the only way to survive. Today, all around the world, we are seeing a new kind of network of relationship-driven economics emerging, with individuals joining forces sometimes to fill the gaps left by existing institutions, ... So what was the point of this introduction? Well, the passage is not going to be about the Soviet Union. It's not really going to be about the ways in which the Soviet people created their own informal networks to exchange goods and services. What is the purpose? Why did the author include this? Well, it's to show, I think, a case in which a people came together to form what you could call social networks to fill or to satisfy the needs of the day, in this case for economic things. So let's go to the choices and see what we've got. Is the purpose of this to introduce the concept of social networking? Seems reasonable. I mean, that is the topic of the passage. We are getting some sense in which they're creating, notice here, networks of social connections. Seems pretty reasonable. Is this to demonstrate that technology has improved social connections? Notice nothing in this paragraph says anything about technology. In fact, that if technology played any role in this process. Later we'll talk about technology, but that's not the purpose of this opening paragraph. List differences between the Soviet Union and other countries. They don't mention other countries here, nor do they mention any differences. Emphasize the importance of examining historical trends. I mean, in some sense, it's important to examine historical trends, or at least history, because that gives us this example. But that's not the purpose of this paragraph. The author doesn't go on to say something like, therefore it is important that we look at this historical example so that we learn X and Y and Z, right? That's the kind of thing you would expect to see if an answer like D was going to be correct. We don't see that, so the answer is not D. And we're going to go with A. Notice again, it makes sense within the context of the paragraph and within the passage as a whole. This passage is about social networking. Your introductory paragraph does typically introduce the topic of the passage. So this one is A. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.